Hello and welcome to the Cameo Show. I'm your host, Cameo, and I am joined today by my husband and co-host and partner in crime, Mr. Greg Braun.
How's it going?
Greg usually starts us off with a dad joke.
Okay, yes. Have you heard the one about the gaslighter?
No?
Yeah, you have.
He always has them perfectly lined up with our topics. Today's episode is actually all about Greg and his experience with recently completing EMDR therapy. I'm going to use my phone for cheat notes here so that I don't get anything wrong. EMDR therapy is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It is a structured psychotherapy approach primarily used to treat trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. EMDR is based on the idea that trauma can disrupt normal information processing, causing distress. And it uses bilateral stimulation to help reprocess these memories correctly. I don't want to get into the steps of EMDR and claim to know anything about the process of EMDR from a clinical standpoint. But what I do want to do is literally let Greg share his experience with EMDR therapy in hopes that it will encourage someone who feels stuck, who feels scared, who feels confused about why they can't get over something or get through something that has presented itself as a traumatic experience for them, to seek this out and to not be afraid to learn about it and to get the help that they need to process through things. We are really big around here on mental health and therapy and debunking the myth that something's wrong with you or that you're weak or that you're not manly enough if you go to therapy, because we have seen firsthand what the proper process of therapy can do to change our lives and our relationships for the better. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you, because I think that aside from me asking questions, you're going to explain this and your experience better than any other way than just saying go.
Yeah. So I am nothing special. I'm just a human being that's going through life, and I am dealing with things that have happened to me, and I'm dealing with trauma from my childhood, and I'm dealing with, just things that life throws at you, lifing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of times to deal with things is just move on to the next thing, either a new distraction, so I don't have to really deal with the thing, or I'll just jump into this next relationship without really evaluating what I messed up in the previous one. I'm just going to jump to the next one. Relationship could be a job, a new girlfriend, just we just have it in our DNA, I think, to just keep charging forward, especially men, because it's results, and we want to just keep moving, keep on moving.
Or we find coping mechanisms
Yeah,
that aren't necessarily a distraction, but they're just our way of
dealing with it.
not having to address
Yeah,
what's happening. I mean, they really are a distraction if you get
yeah,
real and break it down to the most basic, but typically it's some type
yeah,
of destructive behavior that you're participating in to cover up the
yeah,
pain that you might be experiencing inside.
yeah. And so on the journey of not drinking, it has given me a lot of space and the ability to maybe evaluate and see things. But there's some things that you just, like you said, stuck. Some things just, they feel like you're stuck on them. So no matter what is happening in your real time life, emotionally, you're maybe stuck at 12 years old where you had some traumatic event happen. So you might be a 46-year-old man, but you're still stuck back here emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
You can physically be 46, you can physically be in years, this many years on earth, but you might have something that stunted your emotional growth
Mm-hmm.
early on, and you just never got past it. And then you're just kind of going through life with the best you can, but you're emotionally at like a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old,
Right.
that's just like an example of what I'm
It's
saying.
something that you carry with you that you don't even recognize because it wasn't something that,
You dealt with.
yeah,
You
right.
didn't deal with it. You didn't process it through, and you don't have the tools.
Or maybe didn't even realize at the time that it was something that was traumatic happening to you, right?
Yeah.
So for those of you who are new to the show and maybe just joining us for the first time, Greg and I have been married almost 20 years. We have had our share of ups and downs, both very high peaks and very low lows. 10 years ago, we moved our family from Ohio to Florida. We were experiencing an extremely low point in our marriage and in our lives individually for various reasons, and had some traumatic events that we were dealing with in the process of that, as if moving 1,000 miles away from everything that you know isn't already traumatic. It was as a result of traumatic. It was as a result of traumatic, unprocessed stuff that we were dealing with. And so, kind of back to the beginning for you, like you stopped drinking 10 years ago because we moved here to deal with things in a different way. And through the course of your own self-discovery and your own healing, you found new pathways and new things that you embarked upon that, because of the space not drinking gave you, helped you feel like you were healing.
Yeah. I mean, this sounds crazy to say this, but the only reason I think I never really dealt with it prior to that was because I was busy. I was too busy to deal with things. If I wasn't at work doing my job, I was working on projects that meant something to me. And then after that I would drink, and I would there would always be something to, but never just the space and time to like reflect and try to figure things out, give yourself that. And
On a
so,
really deep level.
yeah, I mean, not just surface, but yeah, on a deep level.
So as we moved and you were working on things and things were starting to feel better, there were still some things that just, as you mentioned, felt stuck. Like for some reason, there were things that even though you felt like you had all the tools and like you had already kind of been feeling better and making meaningful, positive changes in your life and feeling empowered to do so and do more of, sometimes you would, like, life would happen and you would be triggered, which is a triggering word, but be triggered by something that would take you back and literally suck you and draw you right back in to that moment that subconsciously you had locked in as something traumatic that you hadn't dealt with. Can you explain what that felt like? Or
Yeah.
like, am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's probably very common for people to feel this way. Like when someone says something to you in the Starbucks line, it makes you very mad because they say it in a way that just brings up this old emotion that's just lingering inside of you, maybe of disrespect. Maybe you were disrespected as a young age and someone says something and you're just like, oh, and you just, that's what I'm talking about. So like these things just, you can't get past them. You can't like process them. You can't like, why do I still get angry? Because anger is not it's like a secondary emotion. Like really I'm hurt, so therefore I'm angry, so it's like, why am I angry about this thing, or why do I see you through this lens of fear or anger when in reality there's nothing to be scared of, and there's not, like, just took like me being like severely upset for days about nothing. And then finally, like, I remember just like sitting in the hot tub watching the birds like a crazy old man, and I'm just like, my God, I need to deal with this because this is not my reality.
So do you remember what it was that like had upset you to the point where you were on these, several days into feeling angry or depressed or whatever it was? Do you remember what it was?
So like, yeah, I mean, we were in Costa Rica and it was like we were flying home, and whatever tensions and just being on family vacation brings.
The stress of coming home, and it was like
You're in
right
another country
after COVID, and we had to get
Oh yeah.
COVID tested before we could board the
Yes.
plane, and like
Yeah.
we finally get into the terminal.
Yeah, we were on our way home, and it was a simple, innocent thing, and you were just trying to be helpful. But again, I had my I was flared up,
Yeah, things were intense.
Things were intense. So when I said, you're like, "Do you want something to drink?" And I was like, "Yeah, can you get me a Starbucks?" You said, "How about a Red Bull?" And I was like, no, I want a Starbucks. And I think it was just like, I was tired of being questioned. As men, we like to make decisions and be supported in that. And, I really appreciate your ability to give me feedback. And, that's just something I love about you. But like in that moment, I just wanted a Starbucks,
Yeah.
And so it was just like, it really pissed me off.
Yeah.
And you look at me like I'm a crazy three-horned devil. Why would you be mad at that? I'm just asking you if you want a Red Bull. And I'm looking at you like, why wouldn't you just give me a Starbucks?
Yeah.
And it's just, again, everything always comes back to communication.
Yeah.
Everything.
That's right.
Communication with yourself
Yeah.
to start with. But so like, and then we came home and we were just kind of like a couple of days of being home, and I was still really pissed off about it. Everything pissed me off about it. And it just made me go to a really dark place because of our history, and feeling disrespected triggered so many other emotions inside of me of my childhood traumas. And I didn't know how to get out of it. And again, if I was a drinker, I know how I would have got out of it.
Yeah. Right.
But I wasn't, and I was just trying to like figure out the reality. So through the guidance of our marriage counselor, she was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of EMDR therapy?" And we're like, "No." She's like, "Find somebody locally that's an expert at that, and I think that would really help you." So that's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
Research somebody that specializes in it, and again, for me, I have an open mind about things. I don't claim to have it all figured out, and I'm open to trying things to see what works, what doesn't. I'm not going to cling to some idea that I know best, and that's not going to work for me. I'm willing to see what it's all about. And I read some research about it, and it makes sense. To me, it made sense, the process of it. So
Do you feel like you always felt that way, or do you feel like there was a time, even a decade ago, when we first went to marriage counseling, where you might have been not resistant? Like, I don't mean you were ever giving me pushback about going, or maybe hell, it was even your idea to go when we were having trouble 10 years ago. But like, I feel for women and men, but specifically for men, there's a lot of like macho or shame that's associated with like seeking out help. Did you feel that way ever about going to therapy, or this type of therapy in particular, where it went from being couples counseling to you individually?
mm, maybe I would have in the past,
Mm-hmm.
probably in the past, maybe um, but in this situation, I just, through the last decade of growing and reading lots of books and just really investing in my personal growth, part of that journey has been extreme ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going through something, I'm not going to look to blame anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's just for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's been my process. Is like, if I have a problem with something, somebody, some situation, whatever, what can I do to control it? And so I wasn't looking to blame anybody else or looking for a reason why that it wasn't something that I could take ownership of and fix myself.
And so there also wasn't this feeling of like, real men don't go to therapy.
I think the macho thing is not part of the equation,
Yeah.
just because that's flawed,
Yeah.
that's not real.
That's what I was going for and hoping
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
would say.
that's not real.
Because although you say that and you do tend to be open and you have done a ton of work, and I have been fortunate to witness that growth and development and be right beside you all of this time, I don't know that everyone feels that way.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I don't want a blanket statement or stereotype, but men specifically feel like nothing's wrong with me. I'm not broken. I don't need help, especially when it comes to dealing with something traumatic or emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also add to that, separate from that, but along the lines of trauma, we had a guest on the podcast early, one of the very first episodes. She may have even been my very first or second guest, but Crystal Bell was on talking about PTSD and how there was this feeling of unworthiness, because we think of PTSD as like people who go off to war and witness insane things, or first responders, and that having emotional PTSD was something that felt like, well, I don't qualify for that. Like, I don't need that in depth of some type of therapy or help for that. And almost a feeling of like guilt or shame for even having, an emotional PTSD to even deal with when it comes to like that whole comparison of what we accept or what we view in society as what PTSD is. And so I just wanted to touch on that quickly about the machoism, but then also this feeling of like, well, I'm not worthy of getting that type of help because it's not that extreme. It's not about that. It is about you and what you're experiencing in your life in all varying degrees for varying reasons. And what's traumatic for one person may not be for the next, but it's about learning how to have the tools and to have the understanding of how to get through it and really live a full life because you're no longer living in that past experience.
Yeah. And if you find yourself like, this thing always just really upsets me, this thing really bothers me, that's probably a sign that you're stuck on something.
Yeah.
And you just can't get past it. And it's just creates this emotional baggage that it doesn't just go away.
Yeah.
The reason I kind of like scoff at the macho thing, like with, going to therapy or whatever, it's kind of, to me, my view on it is, if I'm out of shape, then I would need to work out and get my body in shape. Then your emotional fitness is no different to me. Like, it's all part of the equation. It's not anything that's like, oh, we don't talk about that. You're not born knowing how to do all this stuff, and life continues to keep coming at you.
Yeah.
I mean, things happen, decades go by, and if you don't deal with things, it just builds up and it just kind of sits in your temporary storage to a point where you just lose your shit over something silly like a coffee in the Starbucks.
Red Bull, right? So it wasn't ever about the Red Bull, but that feeling of being questioned triggered you and took you to a dark space for days, where we reached out in an emergency call to our couples counselor because it was like, save us, we're like going way off course here, and like we're ready to.
And you're confused because you're like, all I did was ask him if he wanted a Red Bull,
and he's ready to like pack his bags and
you were so surprised when she was like, well, Cameo, men don't like to be questioned about every little decision. For all the women out there that are listening, like, think about that. Like, it's like nagging wife or, but men actually really, really, really don't like that. I mean, like, that really tears down their feeling of like being a man. There's ways to frame it so you don't feel like you're questioning. A little decision like that feels like a big decision, especially if you're a traumatized, if you've got trauma that you need to deal with.
Well, and just really quickly, again, huge advocates of therapy or counseling because it is so important to have someone who is an outside, unbiased professional provide that kind of clarity and some parameters for you. Because you're right, I was kind of shocked. Like, all I did was ask him if he wanted possibly something else because I saw a Red Bull and got excited, and that was it.
Yeah.
And for him to, in my mind, twist that into me being a controlling, nagging wife was so unfair. But for her to be able to step in and be like, your feelings aren't wrong. Like, I can see why you would feel that way, but you also have to consider that just by merely making a suggestion, men and women are different. They view things differently. Women want to say, does this dress look good on me in yellow?
Yeah.
And for someone to be like, oh, why don't you try the pink one? And then they're like, okay, I'll try the pink one. But men would be like, why would you suggest I try something else? Is this not good enough?
And
or
until
whatever.
that moment, we were like, we didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
And that phone call took a total different direction because you were thinking, this is all him. He's crazy.
Yeah.
And
I would further that by saying it isn't necessarily just men and women. I think that, again, it goes back to like what our own personal experiences are, maybe things that we don't even recognize have happened in our life or to us at different phases in our childhood, our adolescence, our adulthood that have left an imprint on us. And so it went from this Red Bull and versus coffee to me versus you to our counselor saying, hey, Greg, the reason that went from just being a little incident that you need to communicate better about to being a 5-day or however long it was situation where you're ready to like throw in the towel is because there's some unprocessed gunk that's living in your body and that's inhibiting you from seeing things for what they are in the moment, because it's bringing you back to whenever that trauma happened.
Yeah.
So it went from a Red Bull to you going to EMDR therapy. And can you tell us what that was like when you went
Yes.
in? Because it's different than going in and sitting on a couch and having a conversation with a person.
Yeah, I absolutely loved the process of it. And I am open to going back if I ever, need to,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just, again, it's like lifting weights. It's like, eating clean. I mean, like, it's just it's taking care of your emotional self.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was really cool because it was a blend of talk therapy where I could go and talk to someone that was going to be a good listener, that's going to give me feedback and good tips, and not going to take sides, and just I had never had individual therapy like that. We've had couples therapy, but to have individual therapy was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the EMDR part of it is, you put on headphones, there's a thing you can watch, and it kind of, I don't know, it stimulates the left and right brain.
That's that bilateral that I
Yeah.
was describing at the beginning, right? Where it causes you to focus on moving your thought process back and forth in your brain.
Yeah.
That's
Which
crazy.
it sounds nutty, but I don't know how,
Or
but
scientifically, all the
I just
details.
know how I am now compared to before I did it. And I'm a totally different person emotionally, because after doing that, I don't even know how long, maybe a couple months. I'm not even sure how long I did that.
I think it was a couple months.
It was just such a great experience because everything's a lot calmer. If something comes up that would have triggered me, I can look at it more objectively and be almost like I would watch it on a Netflix show. You watch it, you see it, you experience it, and then it just goes away. Not something that you pull up in your emotional storage and feel the pain of that moment like it's happening right now, even though it was 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it felt.
Yeah, and I want to get into that definitely like a little bit deeper. But when you said how many sessions you went to, it reminded me of
Yeah.
a stat that I found about EMDR therapy and the results. And it says that it often results in faster recovery compared to other treatments. A study found that 84% to 100% of single trauma PTSD patients were no longer diagnosed with PTSD after 6 to 12 sessions. So, depending on the frequency of how long you're going, I think you went once a week for about 2 months. So, maybe 6 to 8 sessions.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the day when you went and you came home and you're like, I'm done.